I'm Shannon.
And I'm Mark.
And this is Dirt Sailor the Podcast. On this episode of Dirt Sailor the Podcast, we will be discussing Israel, Hamas, and the southern border. Happy Throat Punch Thursday.
Well, happy Throat Punch Thursday.
How are you doing on this fine November day?
Now that I'm sitting in the Taj Mahal here with a set of earphones and a microphone, doing good.
I'm glad to hear it.
How you doing?
Not too bad. I have been working on our mini farm, and I have realized that my ancestors have worked very hard in their lives.
They worked their you-know-what's off, huh?
They did.
Yeah.
Something as simple as pulling and pitting olives. I did not realize when you do it by hand, I understand we've created machines for us nowadays to run those big farms. But when you do it by hand, just how involved it can be, even though we're talking ladder, human, bucket, water, and a pitter going from one into the, into the other. It takes the toll on your body.
Yes, I thought you were going to tell me it was hard work sitting watching your husband pull weeds. Boy, was I wrong?
It's hard work watching my goat eat weeds and then not eat all of the weeds in the section before moving on. That's hard work.
Well, maybe when they have babies, you can put all four of them in a row and make them act like a tractor disc.
Right? Just put them on lines and, no, you cannot go. You must eat more. No kidding. Did you know?
I did not know.
That we have a budget problem here in California.
What? You mean we have uber-educated people that cannot control their spending?
That cannot control their spending. I always say tax the rich, add a new tax for the wealthy, and somehow all of our budget problems will be solved. It's because the wealthy aren't paying enough. Well, we are seeing the wealthy flee after overrepresentation of taxes and underrepresentation of actual benefit of those taxes. But they are fleeing the state. States like Florida have seen the influx, Texas influx, California, a mass exodus, including some of the top people, because it's harder when you are socioeconomically disadvantaged to move from your location. If you don't have access to a vehicle, that makes it difficult. If you do have access to a vehicle, you have to be able to get to where you're going, have a job set up, have somewhere where you can land. It's much harder than if you have money setting up a plan for the new location.
So, socioeconomically disadvantaged.
Yes.
AKA, does that mean you're poor?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
Just
my fancy $10 word for you.
Your $10 word, it took me about 25 seconds to process that. Wait a minute, that means I'm poor.
But we have a possible revenue shortfall. Well, not a possible. We have an actual revenue shortfall here in California. We are seeing more people exit the state. And it could possibly mean that state employees may be put on furlough because they can't get paid. There's no money to pay them, which will also mean a services problem for the people who live here in the state.
Are state employees part of CalPERS?
I believe so.
Their retirement pension. That's, I believe, I want to say $1 billion in the rears or a deficit, because they do not the people that are collecting their retirement for working all those years. I'm talking about the money managers that have set up these Ponzi schemes that convince these people to do things a certain way, and they tend to not work out.
Yes.
Okay. Just making sure it's those.
It's people. Those people. It's definitely not our retirees, but there's a possible $14 billion projected shortfall.
Didn't we just have a big surplus?
So we had a surplus. However, it came on the heels of the federal government giving us billions of dollars for COVID relief money. I would like to know if during our surplus we were actually having a shortfall, but those federal dollars made it appear differently. Not 100% sure on that. We also saw a 6-month tax filing extension in the state of California, and the revenue that California thought that they might collect, even if a little bit delayed, would be up to $42 billion. That was the forecast back in June. They have only collected $18 billion. So there's an expectation of collecting some more before we get to January. However, it is not nearly what they projected.
Well, isn't it amazing how this stuff is cyclical? And it happens during a bad economy. Then we fix ourselves during a good economy. Yet we say federal dollars sent to the state. Where do those federal dollars come from?
The states.
Taxpayers
and
within
taxpayers
the
on
states.
it goes both ways, because California has to send that money off, other states send that money off to the feds, and then we cycle it back through depending on what's going on.
Right,
But
they electronically send it to the feds, and then the feds electronically send it back.
Yes. So for those of our listeners who may or may not remember this, but former Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger also faced a budget shortfall and problems that were similar. And he forced state workers to take as many as 3 furlough days a month following the Great Recession, so 2008 timeframe. And so that reduced their pay by about 15%. And then there was a multi-year court battle because the workers didn't believe that that was something that he should be able to do. So then Newsom in 2020 negotiated a 9.23% pay cut after his administration projected a $54 billion pandemic-induced deficit. So somehow in 2020 there was a pay cut negotiated because of a projected $54 billion pandemic deficit, but then we were told for the last 2 years we had a surplus. So which is it? Or which was it? Somebody playing some funny money, funny numbers?
Fuzzy math. Funny numbers. See, because somebody in college did their thesis on budgeting, math, and taxes, and it worked great in theory. But when you do it in practical application, it doesn't work so well. Because they continue to spend. And just like losing weight when you're on a diet, how do you do it? You consume less calories. So if you're in a calorie deficit, you lose weight. So if you're in a calorie or cash deficit,
you cut spending.
You cut your spending, or you go broke, or you penalize the very people that make this engine run.
And they are at penalize the very people who make this engine run, because they don't believe that if you have less cash coming in, you should have less cash going out. Instead, the answer is we need more tax dollars. We need to tax somebody. Somebody out there must not be paying their fair share, therefore we need to go get it. It cannot be that everybody's paying their fair share, you're just overspending.
So back during Vietnam, even though I was a young kid then, from 62 up, they used to do a death count every night on the news. They would tell America how many soldiers have been killed. Okay, I believe we should do something similar to that, but with all the monies we send around the world and give to people. So the $10 billion that goes to the Palestinians, the $5 billion that goes to Jordan, the money we send, I can't believe we send money, if I understood it right, to Saudi Arabia. An oil-rich country. Yes, one of the wealthiest oil-rich countries in the Middle East.
And don't forget, some of this isn't just about where we send our money to. There's other ways to spend money as well. If we are providing a country's sole form of defense or main form of defense, we are spending our money to defend them. Right. Sometimes they budget to give us some back, but not really.
Well, if it's food items that these countries need, feed them. But just like I've learned about the Gaza Strip and Hamas and the Palestinians are getting hosed. Let me tell you what.
Yes.
they're getting some money, but all that money is being taken by Hamas, which some people say it's a terrorist organization. Others say it's not. What I know they are is thieves.
Yes.
Okay?
They have spent the money that is designed to put food in people's mouths, shelter, clothing. They have spent it on weapons and tunnel systems.
Correct. Which focuses and sends my eyes to this piece of paper I have in front of me, my paper laptop.
Your paper top?
My paper top. I was just thinking today about Israel, and I was thinking about Palestine and just all of the Middle East in general. And the little question I ask myself, and I want to ask our listeners, is, so at what point do you look at Israel and the Palestinian people and say, okay, who is right? Who is wrong? Should we continue to watch this group called Hamas lob missiles at innocent civilians against the articles of war? Or do we listen to news media outlets that all they talk about is how Israel is the bad guy, the Jews are the bad guys, they're the ones killing civilians? Well, it works both ways. You have Hamas, which I'm assuming Hamas are Palestinians?
So yes and no. From my understanding, they may identify as Palestinians, but when Palestine was set up back in the 40s and before, they declared independence in 48, but when they referred to Palestinians, there were Arab Palestinians and Jewish Palestinians. So Palestinian did not just refer to specifically Arabs. There were, in fact, both Jewish and Arab. So Hamas arose out of, again, my understanding, please correct me if I'm wrong, the Muslim Brotherhood helped to found essentially Hamas in Palestine, and their charter says that death to Jews. So even though they may be supporting Palestine, they are only supporting Arab Palestinians and not Jewish Palestinians.
Well, it's interesting how we justify lobbing missiles in the name of land, in the name of religion, in the name of history. Because if you look at the world and how they view the Jews, if they viewed Hamas the same way, where would we be right now? Because it's interesting that the articles of war and who's lobbing missiles at who, it's okay as long as you follow the articles of war. You can go ahead and kill somebody. You just got to do it cleanly.
There are certain ways that you're allowed to kill someone. And in some ways, I guess we kind of decide through the articles of war what you're allowed to do, when you're allowed to do it, how you're allowed to do it. And we say that sometimes we'll attach money to certain benchmarks being set up, whether we're giving money to the Palestinians but not Hamas, or we're giving money to the Israelis. And so we might try to do something like what the Republicans did, which was to say they wanted to cut the budget of the IRS by $14 billion, that would come out of their budget and they would reappropriate it. So kind of a one-for-one exchange, that we weren't actually spending more money. We were just taking from one allocation and giving it to another. So we're setting up this situation where even within our own country, we have certain stipulations that must happen. Yes, we'll give you $14 billion, but it's coming out of the IRS budget of a different $14 billion. Or we'll say we will allow you to act in a certain manner as long as, and then whatever it is. For instance, there was just the bombing of ambulances in Gaza. And when it first made the news, what I heard was that the Israelis were violating the Articles of War because they were killing people who were in ambulances attempting to get to a hospital. What came out a little bit later was that the Hamas terrorists were committing war crimes by using ambulances to get in and out of certain areas and move their terrorist organization around.
Yes, and that's why they put their fighting forces underneath hospitals and schools and mosques.
Yes, so we can say that we're better than you because we don't bomb hospitals. We can say that you're committing a war crime because you just hit, insert whatever in this particular case, ambulances. So it's also a war of words. And in the Western parts of the world, a lot of it is words, and people don't understand the context of what they're necessarily saying. Because yes, I was appalled that the Israeli people would attack an ambulance and then come to find out that's not what they were doing. And I'm not saying Israel's perfect and they haven't done bad things, but getting back to where our money goes and what attachments can we put on it, do we have the right to tell them these dollars can only go here? And can we expect that that's what would happen?
We do not, and we should give them that money untethered, and they should be allowed to use it for whatever they choose if we're going to give them the money and not dictate to them. But I've heard several Israeli spokesmen back to the ambulance and the quote hospital that wasn't really bombed. And the colonels have talked about the articles of war, and if combatants use places like hospitals and schools, and there's adult age civilians there, and they refuse to leave, that means that they side with the terrorists or the combatants. Therefore, basically, they're there for the pickings. You can attack them, is the way they view it.
Well, and it's been pretty widely known to, unfortunately, many who have lived over there, that Israel will give warning that they're about to return fire,
100%.
basically. And even Hamas said, if you don't give us warning of where you're going to attack, we will kill the hostages that we've taken. But so they give warning, and then the people that are there are told by Hamas that if they leave, they will kill them.
Right.
They want them to stay there and be...
Of course, because they're cowards.
Yes.
But it's interesting that you never hear the news media say that. You never hear the news media other than a couple of outlets. Israel does this to help protect the civilians. They give them pre-warning. They're sending in aid. They're allowing other countries to bring in aid. And that's why they split the Gaza Strip in half, because obviously their intelligence told them that most of the tunnel systems are north of center, and that's where they needed to go attack. And that's what they're doing. They're absolutely pummeling from the center north. And that's what I would do. I would carpet bomb, unfortunately, and level that entire upper half. You know, if they're thinking that potentially the hostages are all in one place, all in one tunnel, okay, I would give them the opportunity to get them out. And I'm going to get a lot of hate and discontent for this, but you sometimes have to sacrifice the few for the many. If the death of 250 hostages would save 4 million lives on both sides, is the calculus worth it? It's heartbreaking, yes, but I believe there's value there in saving millions over a couple hundred. Well, if they're not already dead.
And you would also have to look at what kind of an effective rescue could you conduct? Not just, do we bomb them, do we not? Can we get the leaders, can we not? But also, could you actually effect a rescue? Could you do it?
Right, and they must know something that I obviously don't, because they're the intel and they're there. That's why they're encircling Gaza City.
Right, they've already made certain rescues and made certain moves. They've already started the ground war. They have people there. They would be continuing to just completely decimate the area if they didn't have some sort of intelligence that's telling them to go with this ground war.
Right, and that's a thought coming out of my head, and that's the way different chess pieces are moved around a board. okay, if we do this, what's cause and effect? If we do this, what happens? Public opinion, if we just bomb the, like I just said, out of the entire northern half and it kills all the civilians, what's the ramifications from America and Germany and the Netherlands and Puerto Rico, where all these folks are from? What's going to happen in the long run? But like Netanyahu and others have said, this right now is for their very survival. If they lose this or they stop, like the Biden administration wants them to, take a pause for humanitarian relief, and they get behind the curve again, allow them to regroup, they lose.
Right, because if you take a pause for relief, you're really taking a pause and they get to regroup.
Yes.
They get to come up with a different attack plan.
And you have this other group up north that they call themselves Hezbollah, who supposedly has 120,000 highly sophisticated missiles and rockets provided to them by Iran.
Well, I'm seeing a theme. Hamas, Iran, Hezbollah, Iran, Houthis, Iran.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And what's there with the Iranians? Oh, wait a minute. They're actually Persians. And Persians used to rule over all that land over there. And they only know one thing.
Murder.
Brutal force. That's the only way you put this in check. And I was surprised yesterday that they being a news media outlet that's nationwide, was showing one of our submarines and that they were there and how many Tomahawk missile systems are on that boat. So that's a good deterrence if our leadership's willing to use them.
I guess we will see through time because this is a bit longer of a war. I don't know if they expected a quicker fall from Hamas and also not fighting a front with Hezbollah, not getting missiles inbound from Yemen. What a ceasefire / peace agreement. I don't think Biden's in any position to negotiate a peace agreement like we've seen it with presidents past.
No, he can barely negotiate walking around the White House.
Walking around, let alone English at this point.
And let's not forget that there's still an impeachment inquiry going on, and one of the House Select Committees has found all kinds of checks that are loans.
I don't understand how. Okay, so we are pivoting. Let's go with the White House. Let's go with Biden. Let's go with possible impeachment, how this inquiry is looking. I have seen, even as of today, news organizations through their pundits coming out and saying, just because you see checks and you see hundreds of thousands of dollars going into Biden's account, that's not a smoking gun, that's not real evidence, and it just doesn't exist. Real evidence does not exist.
Well, see, actually the math does when you do the math, because when you take X that came from that Chinese company, you put it into Hunter's solely owned company, and then it gets parsed out and goes to his uncle, and then his uncle and his aunt take that money and put it into their personal account. Then they write the man a check for $40,000, the man being his brother, Mr. Joe Biden. Well, it works out to be 10%
to the big guy
of the original amount coming from CCP or whatever the name of the Chinese company was. So what was that? That was 10% to the big guy.
And we're not talking about just one check either. This isn't just a one-off where they're saying, oh, brother Biden gave Joe Biden one check as a repayment. It's over and over again that we see money being moved around to the different family members. And we saw it with Hunter Biden too. Money going in and out. I believe it was Cash App. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to have to go look it up. But money going in and out, asking dad for money, getting money, etc. And I understand that family can give family money. You're legally allowed to give gifts of so many thousands of dollars to people a year. But something else that can happen when you're running a business and you're trying to parse out certain funds, or if you cash them out and you put cash in your bank, You could potentially even be tagged as structuring if you try to get under, say, a $10,000 threshold over and over again, and the bank catches on that you may be trying to get non-reported times.
Yes, and the federal government wanted to lower that number down for us normal citizens to what, $750?
They wanted to lower the amount that was reportable through these companies like Cash App to 600 as IRS reportable events for 1099 type purposes and paying taxes on it. But yet you have someone over here who's doing $40,000 checks, $200,000 checks. We actually have the tax records of Joe Biden. He released them. He released all of his tax records, and I can't remember from what year to what year, but he released them, and they've also shown that some of what he's claimed in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, have gone unreported on certain disclosures.
So he owes back taxes too, and that's why some of the IRS agents that came out have said that when you post it as a loan or a loan payment, the IRS does not cue into that as taxable income. So the man that claims that everybody should pay their fair share is cheating the system.
Yes.
And he's been cheating the system for probably 30 plus years.
For quite a long time.
I'm sure there was some person or persons within DC that were his mentors when he was younger and taught him how to do this.
This is how you do what you do to get away with what you can.
Yeah, this is definitely a learned trait by experts.
So let's keep with Joe Biden. A couple of things that we've seen come out and have been elevated for the past weeks and months. We have GOP senators who are bashing Biden's immigration policies after going to the border. I don't think it takes our GOP senators bashing any immigration policies, but anyone who goes to the border can see that we are at extreme risk. Over the last fiscal year, they have had the most amount of terrorists that they have ever caught at the border they've caught crossing. Those are just the ones that they got. Those are not the gotaways. And we now have, I believe it's over 7,000 who are marching their way up through Mexico, and they're going to prepare to rush the border. We have cases in Texas where the Border Patrol was actually cutting apart the razor wire and telling Texas they have to remove any barriers that they've put up to try and stop the people who are illegally crossing the border. But what have we done? We have opened ourselves up for terrorist attacks. In many cities across the country, we don't have the money to house and feed and clothe these individuals. Oftentimes when people would cross the border, they would have a general idea of who they're going to meet and where they're going to go. And so if they know that Auntie lives in Fresno, California, they are going to attempt to cross the border and make it to Fresno, California. That would leave them with a place to stop and possibly even an opening for a job, because Auntie might know where to get this person into a job for, say, Spanish-speaking individuals. But instead, we have so many people who are coming to the United States with no place to land that they have now become what we call public charges. They are on the public dole because we are housing them, we are feeding them, we are clothing them, and in some cases now we are giving them work permits and telling them that they can work, which would arguably be great, but then what do they need? They need long-term housing solutions, so they are getting their housing covered, whereas traditional Americans who are paying tax dollars, who might be struggling, are not. So how are we, as a country, not going to fall apart from that?
We are. We're already falling apart. This is the death of a great nation. I do not believe it's fixable this time. You have allowed a crop of America haters to be put in charge. And I guarantee you that George Soros has a big smile on his face, because this is exactly what this man does to countries if he doesn't break their financial wares. That's what he does to countries with his billions. And that's money run amok, if you ask me. All the good he could be doing, he's doing just the opposite.
So another thing that we're seeing, not talking about all the good you could be doing. So within our government, if you look at the Department of Homeland Security and then you parse out everybody's job under the Department of Homeland Security, you will come to my former organization and the two sister organizations. So you have CBP, ICE, and CIS. I used to work for CIS. ICE itself breaks off into two different groups. With ICE, you have Homeland Security investigations, and then you have enforcement and removal operations. So basically doing two different functions, although HSI itself can remove people from the country. It's usually left up to ERO. ERO maintains the custodial facilities used to detain individuals. So anyway, bringing that up, HSI deals a lot with counterfeit items coming into the country, and they also deal with child trafficking. They do a lot of child trafficking cases, so they will work to find where children are being trafficked, and they could be United States citizens. We're not just talking about foreign nationals. So special agents who work child trafficking cases have been pulled off of going after child traffickers to concentrate on making sandwiches for migrants at the border.
Well, we want to make sure no migrant goes hungry. It's pretty important.
It is important that we feed people in our custody. It's also important that we remove people.
Right. So why don't you put the lunch meat, the cheese, and the bread and the spread down on a table and let them make their own food? We'll feed them. They can do the work.
Yeah. So if you want to look at the way we are spending our money on allowing people to come into this country, people who have ill will towards us, and then we're housing them, we're feeding them, we're pulling people off of their very important jobs. I would say stopping child trafficking is a very important job among many others that they do.
100%.
And instead, we have to now focus our resources on a Biden-supported mass migration to the United States of people who hate us.
Oh, I was going to say, why are we so hated? When our borders are open for everybody, we give away free money. There's churches that take care of people. We just are generally, if you look at the sum total of the parts, good people, right?
Maybe. I don't know.
So don't you think that all the countries around the world should love us and not hate us? This is what happens when you have weak leadership and people know that they can push you around because we have a poor, frail old man at the top of the pile and nobody fears him. Nobody fears the U.S. any longer. Like I said, just like the Persians, when you show force and you show strength, then you get to rule the roost. Just like, little caveat that most people don't know, that is why our special operators, when they were over in Afghanistan or Iraq, were allowed to grow beards. Why would that be? Because that shows people of Middle Eastern descent machismo. Because if you had a beard, depending on how your beard was and what you look like, you were a well-respected macho man. If you were hairless on your face, they thought lesser of you. So if you have big guns in your arsenal, people fear you. You have a frail 80-year-old man that has cognitive reasoning problems, they don't fear you.
Well, people like George Takei support Biden, vote blue no matter who, support so much that he seems to fear everybody else because he said that democracy will fall if we don't support the frail old man.
See, and they're wrong. He's another person that studied and tried a bunch of paperwork in college that didn't work. Democracies are as strong or as weak as their weakest link, and we've got a bunch of weaklings right now.
We are pretty weak right now because of our leadership.
Not that I know what I know, but I know what I know.
Well, speaking of leadership, and talking about taxpayer funds, so bringing that in from earlier, right now our leadership, so New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy used thousands in taxpayer funds to party at Taylor Swift's concert and other stadium events. So apparently, the New Jersey governor, who is a Democrat, is asking the state Democrat Party to reimburse taxpayers after he used $12,000 in state funds at a Taylor Swift concert and other stadium events. The governor's office has also dipped in to the $95,000 personal expense account set up for the office, and he has failed to reimburse for those expenses that are not covered. The account is set up to pay for official receptions, official residence, and other official expenses and cannot be for personal use. Apparently, he's 5-figure deep into using that money for personal expenses, going to concerts. But let us not forget former Governor Chris Christie, who is a Republican, and he's trying to get the Republican nomination.
Bridgegate.
He had Bridgegate, but he also had the state Republican Party reimburse roughly $82,000 that he spent at MetLife Stadium doing some of those same things. Why? I don't even think you should be allowed to reimburse and it go away. This is theft of government funds. Both of these guys, Republican, Democrat, I don't care, they should be prosecuted.
Absolutely. Just like our governor here in California should not have gone to China. How much did
100.
that cost us?
Well, and did he get paid? Was he on vacation or did he count it as official California duties and he got his full paycheck for his time spent in China? Because if he's on California time getting his California paycheck and not on personal leave,
we need to make sure he pays taxes.
He needs to be charged for that money because this is not what we pay him to do. And I'm tired of people in government thinking, oh, we're going on an official government exchange. No, stay in your state.
Oh, you mean like when all the officials during COVID went to Hawaii?
Yes.
For a little sabbatical?
Just
yep.
Very similar. And it is maddening, to say the least.
Well, it is because we can see through the smoke. And there's millions of Americans out there that can see through the smoke as well. But we're powerless to put the fire out and correct things because these people have put themselves into positions that you can do nothing about them. You complain about somebody, California, you'll get a state tax audit. You complain about a federal employee, you'll have just like during, I can't remember what the group was called of all the Republicans.
The Tea Party?
Thank you so much. When the Tea Party rose, I should have known that because I know people in the Tea Party. They were audited.
Wait, the Boston Tea Party, or people?
Yeah, I knew them too. According to my grandsons, I rode a pterodactyl to school. So yeah, and I was in World War I, so I time travel.
I got asked if I was we were talking about being a veteran and trying to explain to them, and so they did actually ask if I fought in the Revolutionary War. So I'm a little bit older than
mine,
you.
Yeah. But, the Tea Party members, I don't remember the lady's name, but her and her husband were business owners. Lois Lerner had them audited. They had never had any of this stuff happen in their 20-some years of existence in the state they live in and the companies they owned. They had the FBI show up. They had DOT. They had OSHA. They had the EPA. There was like 23 different federal
Every acronymed agency
yes,
showed up.
audited them or showed up to find them or try to shut them down. And that's what happens when these people get too much power. These people are these politicians that have these swollen heads that think that I'm unstoppable. You can do nothing to me. And I don't like Chris Christie.
Me either. I just want to be clear on that. I know there's a lot of people that were kind of iffy on, or I say maybe okay. I have watched him for quite some time in the Republican sphere. I do not like him, and I would like to say that even my older daughter, who has watched some of these debates, She actually critiques them on how they do in the debate. She does not like Chris Christie just from his ability to debate.
Well, maybe it's a New Jersey thing, maybe because they think they're macho and they're better than everybody else. I don't like his mouth. I don't like the way he disrespects people. And then he turns around and acts like he's holier than thou. He is a fake, just like a lot of the others. And I hope that pretty soon he runs out of money and he goes away.
So far, he's qualified for the third debate, but they are raising how much polling you have to do and how much money you have to have for each debate as it goes. And so hopefully, as you said, some of that dissipates.
We'll see it. And the person I talk about a lot, and I've mentioned her to you several times on our podcast, is a former Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard.
Yes.
She could clean the floor with all of them, even Nikki Haley.
You think even Nikki Haley?
Absolutely.
That would be an interesting debate.
Yes, that would be an awesome debate. And actually, that would be a pretty good ticket, too.
Who would be the president?
Nikki Haley.
So you'd have Nikki Haley and her as number 2?
Yes. I think she could clean her up in a debate, but I think that Tulsi Gabbard would be better as a VP or as a cabinet member running the military. I think with her years of experience and her no-nonsense approach to doing things and how she articulates, she would be phenomenal.
So talking about whether or not Nikki Haley would be the appointed person or who would end up getting the votes, if you look at how things are polling, keep in mind, polls were wrong in 2016, polls were wrong in 2020. Take polling for what you will. But right now, Trump is still polling so far ahead of every other Republican who is at the debate stage that is it likely to be anybody but Trump?
Well, I don't know what I do know. I don't know what I don't know. But what I do know is even if he polls great and wins the presidency again, how do you keep the dogs off of him? Unless he goes in there and fires all of the long-term employees, which you say is very hard to do and darn near impossible.
Yes. It would be very difficult to do, and something that I have found out since I didn't realize how many Democrats worked for the government. I'm not trying to sound stupid. I mean, you go from the military, which seems to lean mostly Republican. Not all are Republican. There are many Democrats. But it seems to lean more heavily Republican than it does Democrat. But if you get into the actual government employees, how many people tend to lean Democrat going all the way up to
like 70%.
It's high. So I was caught off guard by that number. But let's talk about keeping with Trump and Biden. So we had Trump 2016 to 2020, Biden 2020 to present. I know technically it's like 2017 to 2021 and 2021 to present, right. But as far as elected days, however you want to look at it, 4 years and getting on to 4 years. Well, not even 4 years. We haven't even come across 3. Long story long. Most Americans, according to new polls, most Americans believe they'd be better off financially and the U.S. would have been kept out of at least 2 wars if Trump had been reelected. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree with that statement, 100%. And I believe there's a little culpability from the owners of Facebook, former Twitter owners, and some of these other social media outlets for not changing votes with the machines, but changing minds and votes by hiding what one half of the country was saying.
Right. Hiding what one half of the country was saying. Apparently, Republican mailers would go into the junk email boxes. So Republican mailers weren't getting out, but Democrat mailers were getting out. Thank you, Google, Gmail, etc. At least that was the claim. And then you had Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, now owned by Facebook, but you had these social media companies that would suppress stories. And so you would say, has XYZ ever happened? And it would be like, nope, Hunter Biden laptop, that is Russian disinformation. It is not truth. They completely blocked and suppressed to the nth degree on social media. And so if you can't get the truth out there because one side says we're not going to allow you to, they wouldn't allow the Hunter Biden laptop story to go out to the public, even though it was truthful, based on, oh, somebody said it might be Russian disinformation. Yet they talked about all kinds of things with Trump for years on end that turned out not to be truthful. So why didn't you wait until that was vetted? Much like you said you wanted to wait until this was vetted.
That's not how they work.
That's not how they roll. It's just not how they roll.
This is kind of back to the Israeli conflict. Just like people around the world picking sides before they know the truth.
Yes, the ambulance thing, appalling as an example. Not that I agree with it, but Hamas leaders were in those ambulances. So yes, are they allowed to stop them?
Well, I'm a couple, 3 weeks ago sitting, recovering from surgery on my couch, watching the news, and I see a little dent in a parking lot and a hospital next to it.
Over 500 people were killed?
Yeah, over 500 people were killed, and it was Israel's fault. And they were so quick to throw Israel under the bus that they didn't look at all the other collateral damage that Israel's been doing to all the other buildings and realize that when they drop a bomb from an airplane, it leaves about a 25-foot deep crater, massive. And guess how many people actually died there? Less than 25. But the world, New York Times, all these people were willing to automatically go after the Jews and blame them for everything.
It's their fault. Well, they deserved it too. That's another thing that our news tells us, is that the children in Palestine, no child is deserving of death. Do not read that into what I'm about to say. But the children of Palestine are worse victims and are more relatable than the Israeli children that were killed. There were babies that were beheaded, burned, families that were torn apart, women that were kidnapped and raped, drugged through the streets, all kinds of stuff, bad stuff. And both are extraordinarily sad. And I don't want to see either side. I don't want these atrocities that happen to happen. But according to our news media, we are only to care about the Palestinian children because the Israeli children, the Jewish children, deserved it.
Right. And that's not Israel making that up, what happened with their citizens. That's actual Hamas members that had GoPro cameras on and actually filmed their own atrocities that they were committing. Yet if Israel was to give that film to the major outlets around the world, they would still say it was fake, even though people have seen it and it's not fake, it's real. Real Jewish people are missing from these communities. Whole communities were burnt down and bombed. These Hamas guys that were captured or killed had documentation and information on them saying what they were doing, why they were doing it, and how to get Jewish people back to the Gaza Strip so they could hold them as hostages. But then I go back to, how long do we let this cycle continue? Is it truly? So I guess you could look at the Bible and say this is truly biblical because this sort of thing's been happening for
thousands of years.
Yet when we had the orange face real estate man in charge.
Orange man bad?
Yes, there was none of this. There was none.
We didn't have a war declared, whether it's in Israel, whether Hamas wants death to all Jews, so that's been in their charter for a long time. But we didn't have a war declared in Israel. We didn't have a war declared in Ukraine. There was a plan to get us out of Afghanistan. So that's also something that was brought up, was the botched withdrawal of Afghanistan. Was Orange Man bad? It was his fault, Mr. Orange Face. because it was his plan. But if you look at how the withdrawal process was working, Trump had walked it back numerous times when certain benchmarks were not being met, but he still had the goal to get us out of Afghanistan. It just wasn't pull out from the wrong area, leave everybody behind, don't help your people, don't help my people. We're just going to head out. He had a plan. Biden said he followed that plan, but that wasn't the truth because it had already been walked back too. What they did in Afghanistan was atrocious.
Well, Biden's leadership and the State Department are the ones that botched that.
Yes.
They botched it big time, and I'm having a temporary mental lapse on the guy that was bragging about the Middle East and how happy they were.
Holly?
No.
No. No.
But he is the same one that helped orchestrate the removal of people from Afghanistan, and he just totally botched the whole thing.
Jake Sullivan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jake Sullivan's the one that said just a few short weeks ago that the Middle East was quieter than it's ever been.
Had been in 2 decades.
And he did it, and he personally did a phenomenal job. Well, he's the same one that was involved in getting people out of Afghanistan, and he totally botched that. And before that, when he worked for, I believe he was in the Obama administration, he botched a lot of stuff there. They just recycle and regurgitate these people, and they make the same bad policy decisions year upon year upon year. Or administration after administration after administration.
Yes, he definitely gets to make all of the bad decisions, but then blame it on everybody else. And somehow he still gets to keep his
So it'd be like
career.
These people spending tax dollars to go to football games, baseball games, and concerts, and they're not held accountable. People just like them make major mistakes. They cost a lot of lives, and they're not held accountable.
Nope. They are not.
You know who I wonder if is going to be held accountable is this new AI person that's been named CEO of a company.
Really?
Yes. So it was weird looking at the article because it first said a Colombian rum company, Dictador, appoints new AI robot, Micah, as company CEO. And then 3 sentences down, it says that a Polish company has picked an AI person to run the company. So I'm not sure what part of the world they're from, but it's a rum company. And my thought was, wow, what are they drinking? Are they all drunk?
That's why the rum's always gone.
Yeah. And if the AI CEO makes major mistakes because they say it's really slow to react and answer questions, because even though it's super smart and processing, it can't process some of the questions in a timely manner. So if the company fails, who's held accountable?
There is no one to be held accountable.
No.
Maybe we should have an AI president. There's no one to be held accountable.
Absolutely.
I think we have an AI president.
I was thinking that today, that we have an AI president. It's artificially ignorant.
So let's dive into elections. We have a lot going on with elections, whether it's Trump in court because of election interference. That's something that we've been seeing out of Georgia. There are new election-related charges in a Democrat fraud scheme. And these fraud charges were filed against a pair of, New Jersey Democrats, something about New Jersey, involving voter registration and mail-in ballots. So 2 individuals are facing state election fraud charges stemming from races that took place in 2 different cities. And according to the Attorney General's office, Alex Mendez is facing some additional charges for 2020 in the election fraud case after having previously been charged in 2020 and 2021. So they are following up after some more information was found. But there was another individual, Dr. Henry Lynn Abizam, who was a candidate for mayor in Plainfield, New Jersey in 2021. He has been charged with directing his associates to fill out blank voter registration applications and bringing nearly 1,000 of them to the post office. So they were getting basically faked voter registrations to get more people, invisible people, fake people registered so they could stuff the ballot boxes.
That really happens? I thought it doesn't happen.
Well, we're told that this was some of the most secure elections. So if this was happening in 2020, something that we've brought up on this program before, something on our podcast before, do you think the only thing they voted for was for mayor on a ballot?
Nope.
So if they voted in any other election contest, not just for mayor, what implication should we see, whether it was city council, maybe there was another community voting, thing that was going on for a state representative, for a federal representative, or even for president? Especially if they said there was over 1,000 with one of these Democrats alone of fraudulently registered voters.
We need to put Sidney Powell on the case.
She's a piece of work. No,
wait a minute.
We need to keep her away from the case.
No, we do need to keep her away from the case, and we need to keep people like her away from politics and voting machines.
Yeah, so we have individuals. That was in New Jersey. More charges are coming out from everything that they figured out that they've done. In Connecticut, maybe it's something with the New England state, but in Connecticut, a judge has tossed out a mayoral primary race, the results from it, because there was fraud seen there, and they're making these Democrats rerun. It is for a primary. It's not the open election, so this is just for the Democrats. So the Connecticut judge has tossed out the results of the Democratic mayoral primary in Bridgeport, Connecticut, citing surveillance video that appears to show two women stuffing wads of paper into absentee ballot drop boxes. So now there will be a new primary. This judge has no authority to postpone the general election, so I'm not exactly sure how that will work. If they'll get it done in time.
So this would be an adjective fraught with of a situation or course of action, filled with or likely to result in something undesirable, which means that Hillary was right. There's a lot of Democrat undesirables across the country trying to cheat in their elections.
I would say so, because apparently this is very common in Bridgeport. The claim is, according to this particular article that I'm reading, fraud is rare across the country, but Bridgeport has been an exception, with judges ordering new Democratic primaries in multiple election races over the last 6 years. The incumbent mayor, Joe Ganim, was convicted on federal corruption-related charges, resigned, and spent 7 years in prison. In 2015, he mounted a comeback and has been mayor ever since. So apparently they don't care about crime, bribery, ballot box stuffing. This is just par for course there in Connecticut. But alas, there are some deplorables out there. There are some deplorables, let me tell you what.
On both sides.
On both sides.
Yes.
Oh, look, Chris Christie, we just talked about him.
Prosecute them all.
Yes.
If they're corrupt, get rid of them. Let's try to clean up our politics. And when you have people that really legitimately make unfounded accusations, you got to shut them down quicker.
Yeah, not let them stay in office for dozens and dozens and dozens of years.
Yes.
But keeping on politics, we have a representative here.
Let's do it.
In the state of California. His name is Adam Schiff.
Oh, it's a shift show we're going into now, eh?
We're going into a shift show. So Adam Schiff Show has been a representative in the state of California for quite a number of years. And he is now attempting to go for Dianne Feinstein's seat, the late Senator Dianne Feinstein's seat, as California's second representative. We just had an individual appointed to the Senate who had a little bit of an issue that she had an address and a website that said she lived on the East Coast, but she came in, re-registered in the state of California, and then they appointed her to be a California representative for Senate and then go back to Washington. Apparently, it is not so uncommon that our representatives just don't live here. So Adam Schiff has claimed his primary residence as a 3,420 square foot home that he owns in Maryland. He has also taken the homeowner's tax exemption here in California for a 650 square foot condo that he owns in Burbank. And that is the house that he claims his residence. That's where he represents in his area, because you're supposed to represent your area. So you have him claiming primary residence in Maryland, claiming primary residence in California. You have where he's basically signed documents asserting that the property in Maryland is his primary residence, but also the property here in California is his
primary residence. Woo!
And I get how it can end up being kind of convoluted, because what is he supposed to do? He's supposed to spend essentially half of his time in California. And then when Congress is in session, he's supposed to spend half of his time to make sure he's available for voting and being in session there. A lot of representatives end up having two places. Some rent the second place, some stay in the halls of Congress, and some fly back and forth and do temporary lodging as they go. He claimed that he wanted to spend more time with his family, so his family moved out to Maryland. He has kids. It would make more sense that they would live in a 3,420 square foot place versus living in a 650 square foot condo. So I personally would give deference to the fact that he has to reside in two places. I think that there's not necessarily anything wrong with that because of the way our representation is designed to have you split locations. But where I start to take issue is where you're spending the majority of your time and where your family continually resides. Do they pop back and forth with you to California to Maryland as you go when you're going to spend more time in California?
How many family members does he have? How many kids and a wife? So they all live in that little teeny tiny house there in California?
I don't believe so. I mean, that would be the claim, that he has a wife and kids and they live.
Well, originally, I believe these congressmen and senator were supposed to be citizen legislators, correct?
Yes.
So they should be home a majority of the time doing work for their constituents. The problem is now we've allowed them to hire so many assistants and helpers that they're actually the ones doing the work. So when you email, text, or call one of their offices, you never get the opportunity to speak to your actual representative.
And just to jump in, which is problematic, I do believe that we need true citizen representation. They should not be spending as much time in Congress as they are, but he has two kids. He has a wife and two kids, and we're supposed to believe that he lives half the time with his wife and kids in 650 square foot. Now, if your wife and kids live the majority of the time in Maryland and you pop back and forth, and then you're signing either your mortgage agreements, your refinance agreements, your property deed agreements as living in Maryland, sending all your mail to Maryland, having the notary public in Maryland, having an ID out of Maryland, I'm beginning to think that you're a Maryland representative and not a California representative.
That's what I believe. That you're not truly representing what you were hired to represent. Therefore, you're not a very good representative. You're representing yourself and your own bank account.
Absolutely. Definitely representing your own bank account.
So that was interesting. We were talking about the legislatures because I've just popped up the Texas legislature because I wanted to see how many times or days a year they meet. So the Texas legislature meets in regular session on the second Tuesday in January of each odd-numbered year. The Texas Constitution limits the regular session to 140 calendar days.
That's less than half a year, and it sounds like the sessions are 2 years if they meet in odd number years.
If they meet in odd number years, it's every 2 years if this is still
Accurate.
This is Wikipedia. Is Wikipedia accurate?
You cannot cite Wikipedia on a college level paper as having accuracy because whoever owns the paper can edit it, and they have certain people that are allowed to edit the wiki pages. So it is not considered a scholarly source. However, I would say for our purposes, it would be a decent source of information.
Well, it says the legislature has completed its 88th session, and the next session is the 89th, scheduled to convene on January 14th, 2025.
Oh, so they're done. So unless they call a special session, they're done. They've made all of their decisions for the session.
So if the legislative body can get together and make decisions like that, they must be pretty smart people, Republicans and Democrats.
I would say so.
So then maybe the rest of the country or Washington, D.C. needs to look at what they're doing, if it's right, and pattern themselves after them.
I could even see meeting a week every other month to make sure nothing too major has gone on. Because if they had to meet every time something happens internationally or something happened, if there was a hurricane, especially if it was a pretty tumultuous hurricane season, that could be problematic.
Well, and this flooding coming up from the southern border, I would sure they'd be called into special sessions to help plug them leaks.
So if they had a regular 1 week meeting every other month or 2 weeks every other month, they could get most of the stuff taken care of and then they can go back home. Also, a lot of the stuff that we've turned into federal cases really aren't federal cases, and the stuff that should be a federal case, we're not taking care of anyway.
So don't make a federal case out of it.
Don't make a federal case out of it. Not everything is meant to be as such. We have our wires crossed onto what's important and what's not.
You savvy.
So last thing I'm going to do is bring up Trump. We're seeing a lot of his cases. He's either in court, pending court. They're having some of the preliminary meetings and stuff like that. But one of the things I find interesting about the headlines, a lot of them are gotchas or clickbait or whatever you want to call, and I don't call it. And I don't necessarily like that. Like Jack Smith's hand was smacked down over such and such a filing, or he really lost, and you read the article and it's really peanuts. It's
nothing.
It's not much of anything. But something that has been coming up, something we talked about, was how much access is enough access for these cases. Now, Jack Smith has introduced over 1 million pieces of information, that it could be something as simple as a timestamp on an email, so it's not necessarily rather involved. There's not a whole lot to read on that page. He made the database searchable, and this is the information that was given over, but there's also a lot of hours of video that also has to be reviewed, and whether or not he's giving appropriate access has come back into play. So one of the ways that the prosecutors for Special Counsel Jack Smith has interpreted the access requirements to certain documents and materials is saying that these individuals who have also been charged, Trump's valet, Walt Nauta, and Mar-a-Lago property manager Carlos de Oliveira, they have been charged with conspiring with the president to retain the classified documents there in South Florida and to do it illegally. So a ruling was issued by the judge that Jack Smith's special counsel, that they misinterpreted or overbroadly interpreted the Classified Information Procedures Act And what they did, how they read into the act and how they were applying it, did not comport with the plain reading of the statute. So Smith's team wanted to restrict two of the parties that I just mentioned, the Mar-a-Lago property manager and Trump's valet, wanted to restrict them from reviewing almost entirely anything from the discovery. So that way they're saying that they shouldn't have access to it, and for their reasons that they don't get to have access, and they stated their reasons, but yet these documents could be used to convict them. So
Right.
you could end up having no access to the very things that are ultimately going to be used against you. So that was a pretty bad interpretation by Jack Smith's team. And another thing they wanted to do is only give access in Washington, D.C. So you had to go into Washington, D.C. at the location that they would name, and you had to go to the building that they would house this in, and that was the only location that you could access this classified information. So think of it like a SCIF, because it was technically, some of those documents are classified. In D.C. Where is the case being tried? Case is being tried in Florida. So you can only have access. Oh, you can have all the access you want. And this was to Trump's team. Oh, you can have all the access that you want, but it's going to be in D.C. And we're trying this case in Florida. How fair is that?
It's not, because they want one person to lose, lose, lose. That's why I like the fact that Trump was in court for his other case, the
In New York.
overvaluation.
Right. The nobody is
Yeah.
actually a victim case.
Yeah, and it's interesting that it was brought up that the judge forgets that Trump has been a real estate mogul and expert for over 50 years. So he has 50 years more experience than this judge does, who's already predetermined how he feels.
Yes, and even as of this week, the judge was not liking Trump's answers while he was on the stand, and basically saying that he wasn't going to have him up there anymore, and he was giving nothing that he wanted to hear.
There is no case there. They're just trying to somehow load this guy up with felonies and make him ineligible to run for president.
So I'll get to that in a second. So jumping back to Florida, the outcome of what I was bringing up is potentially they're going to move the May 2024 court date that they're going to start the trial to later because of Jack Smith, his counsel, all of the special prosecution, the prosecutors, not giving access to the people that they're prosecuting, not giving access to the files. And then when they are giving access, saying, hey, you have to fly to a different location. So who can actually do that? Who can have a team that can, because if you're privy to the information, you have to be both in Florida and you have to be in D.C.
Well, and that's how you break these defendants of everything they've saved and every dime they have.
So they are really working on it for that. Now, another thing that I did hear again this week, Trump is making a lot of news. But the thing I heard about Trump, since you bring it up, is that the only case that could potentially stop him from being president again is the January 6th case and the insurrection. If he is found guilty with inciting an insurrection, that is the only one, and this is somebody else's interpretation, so maybe it's wrong, but that would be the only one that can stop him from actually becoming president. All of the others, he could be in jail and be elected president.
If Elon Musk releases the entire body of the tweet from him during January 6th, when he was done speaking, when he said to peaceably march down there and do what Americans do, whatever context or how he said it.
Yeah, he said, and later on he said, this is not who we are. When he heard that it was getting
shortly
a little...
thereafter that, they deleted the tweet, they being the current
Twitter.
or the past owners of Twitter.
Yeah, Jack, whatever his name was.
If they try to make everything, oh, well, he said orange, oh, go attack. Oh, he said purple, oh, that means he's a racist. These people are sycophants and nuts in their minds. They hate the guy so much. Why? It's just like the Jews. Why is there such hatred for a man that changed the entire skyline of New York and made it a better, more beautiful place. He made the economy, helped drive an economy in America better than it's ever been. Oh, I know what it is. He said he was going to drain the swamp. And Chucky Schumer said, oh, you better watch what you say, because the CIA and the Secret Service and the FBI will find 25 ways to destroy your life. Well, look what they're doing.
They have found 25 ways to go after him and attempt to destroy his life, and a lesser person would be defeated. And honestly, if all of this was happening to me, I don't know that I could withstand everything that he has had to withstand.
Unless you had the kind of money and the kind of attorneys he has, you would have buckled before the first case even started.
Right. I would have been representing myself, because I wouldn't have been able to afford after all these court cases. Especially as soon as all these loyal cowards started, quote, turning on him like Sidney Powell. I have a feeling that his attorney that's on the New York case is going to destroy Sidney Powell. She is going to absolutely eviscerate her. Any others that decided to flip. What are they flipping for? Because the prosecution, the government holds a lot in their hands. So if the government has said that they will absolutely destroy you unless you do what we want you to do, lesser people
and I get
cave.
That, and that was kind of tongue in cheek, because if Trump has the evidence that he says he has, if he has these classified documents, which is, I have heard from people within the news, that's why he held on to a lot of them, because he was able to foresee or forecast into the future that they were going to go after him for all this stuff. So he started putting all his ducks in a row. Yet you have a former vice president and a former senator that should be in far more trouble than Trump for having classified documents at your house, unsecure, sitting by your Corvette when you should not be allowed to have them. You cannot declassify them, period. Yet, where'd they go? Well, they probably hit them all. They've probably burned them all, or they've taken the ones out that were actually there and replaced them with a bunch of crap.
And another thing they've probably done, as we've heard with, the National Archives has found so many thousands of documents that relate to the fake names and email addresses that, well, I guess they weren't fake email addresses, the pseudonyms that Joe Biden was using in order to hide some of what he was doing. What did they do? They said, well, he was a VP. They went and asked his president at the time, which was Obama, hey, can we release this? They say no. And then they get to hide tens of thousands of emails, tens of thousands of pieces of evidence showing one way or the other what was going on. So imagine with these documents, if they are from President Obama's time, if they are from President Clinton's time, do they get to say, Presidential Records Act, we're not going to release this? Presidential privilege, does he get to, depending on what it was and where it was, but does he get to cite presidential privilege now that he's a president? So he gets to hide every document that he had with executive privilege?
That's why I believe, as a simpleton, that Representative Comer, who's done a very good job at uncovering all the evidence of the wrongdoings by the entire Biden family, has more up his sleeve than just those 2 checks, because he's too confident. And that's the way to go after Biden and the family and destroy them.
Well, one bite at a time, eating an elephant, right? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. What have each piece that they've released? Oh, I don't know any of Hunter Biden's business partners. And then they say, oh, you had dinner with this one guy. Oh, well, it happened to be this, but we talked about weather. Okay, here's an email. And he has to keep walking back what he's saying. They have to find a new way out of it. So perhaps you're right. If these are 2 checks, they'll find their little statement about it and they'll go with that. And then if they can find another check or another email or another thing that contradicts that statement, they'll keep slapping that.
I guarantee you there's more 10% to the big guy.
That's not enough money compared to what they've spent.
Yes, correct.
I mean, hookers and blow cost a lot of money.
It's very expensive. Just ask them.
This has been a podcast produced and edited by the Dirt Sailor Duo. Mark and Shannon are a father-daughter team who both served in the United States Navy. This production is protected by copyright laws. Until next time, anchors away.